This country always needs good citizens.
Today, in the United States of America, wealth inequality, or the difference between the richest and the poorest in society, is as large as it has ever been. In fact, it's been growing more or less every year since the mid-70s. Despite being the richest nation on earth, we have still yet to solve the problems of poverty in this country, and it's a problem that we all agree has to be dealt with, yet how to deal with it is something that we disagree on wildly. I'm George Turner, and this is the iCitizen Forum. To find out more about this problem of wealth inequality, we went to speak to economist Jared Bernstein, based at the Economic Policy Institute in Washington, D.C., and co-author of the book, The State of Working America.
So here we are with inequality, income inequality, wealth inequality, economic inequality at just about the highest level it's been since back in 1929. And we know that that ended badly, right?
So what is causing that? Why
Well,
what
okay,
changed?
so the obvious question is what's causing it, and it's not a simple question. I always say this is, this is not a single perpetrator. This is murder on the Orient Express. You've got a bunch of different perps in play here. We have much less union power than we used to, and unions have historically been associated with a more equitable distribution of income. We have generally lower minimum wages, at least at the federal level, than we used to have, and so the wage floor isn't what it used to be. Globalization is a huge player on the inequality front. That doesn't mean that globalization is all bad or all good, but certainly one of the costs of globalization is downward pressure on the wages of, let's say, non-college educated workers. All of that stuff really comes down to two words: bargaining power. And if you want one word, power. Basically, most people in this economy, and if you look at today's data, it's really the bottom 80 to 90%. So really the vast majority simply don't have the bargaining power that they used to have to claim their fair share of the growth that the economy generates. The nation's workforce is working harder and smarter. We're baking a bigger, better, tastier pie. This is making me hungry. But as that's been occurring, the slices have been stagnant or even shrinking for the very folks, many of the very folks who are contributing to the growth. That is a fundamental, really basic problem with our economy. And that's why this inequality story is so important, and that's why the magnitude of inequality right now is, I'd say, unsustainable in a true democracy.
And do you think it's a vicious circle? I mean, you talk about bargaining power, so if people become more unequal in terms of their wealth towards other people in society, then their bargaining power would decrease even further, and if that's the main
Okay,
motive.
there are those who will say, sure, we have a lot of inequality. There's an historically, uniquely large distance between the top, the middle, and the bottom, but that's just the way it is. That's just market forces playing out in a meritocracy like ours. The point is not to diminish inequality. The point is that we have a highly mobile society, and regardless of where you start, you're going to end up where you deserve to be. That's wrong in a lot of ways, but one way in which that's wrong is that high levels of inequality, excessive levels of inequality. In fact, I would argue here's another metric for judging whether inequality is excessive. These levels of inequality themselves are reducing the level of economic mobility. Probably the best example is access to higher education. Kids from middle and lower income families are having a harder and harder time getting to college, even if they're able. And one of the graphs I like to use to make this point is one that shows that the completion rate for college grads is just about the same for very low scoring rich kids as it is for very high scoring poor kids. So basically, if you're a smart kid but you happen to be poor, you're no more likely to complete college, and you're pretty unlikely, than a wealthy kid who tests poorly.
Can we talk a little bit about tax? Because one of the things that you researched was the tax regime and how it's become more regressive over the last 30 years.
Progressive tax system is one that asks more from those with higher incomes and less from those with lower incomes. A regressive system is the opposite. In the 2000s, taxes unfortunately became more regressive. They asked less from high-income people relative to middle and low-income people. So the liabilities, the amount of taxes that you had to pay, fell to the tune of over $100,000 for those at the top, and something like $20 for those at the bottom, and just maybe 1,000 or so in the middle. So much bigger declines in tax liabilities, the amount of taxes you have to pay at the very top. One economist called this, in terms of the inequality debate, it's called kind of roughing the kicker.
Why does that happen? Because surely in a democratic system you would choose that the majority are those in the lower half.
I think the reason why that happens, maybe as an economist I'm looking at it through my particular scope, but I think it has to do with a basic misunderstanding of how economics and how economies should work, and a misunderstanding that is pervasive. That is, it's gotten into politics, and it's infected the electorate's view of these ideas. I call it yo-yo economics. That is, you're on your own economics. And the idea here is that if you cut the tax rates of rich people, cut them of everybody, but especially cut them of rich people, if you take away the safety net, if you hack away at Social Security, if you privatize unemployment insurance and Social Security and Medicare, basically diminish the role of government in your life, you're going to create a set of incentives that will lead people to go out there in the marketplace and do their best, and they will prevail and all will be well, right? When you mix yo-yo economics with our version of high-intensity, money-driven politics, what you have is basically politicians running for office saying, I'm going to cut your taxes, I'm going to privatize this, I'm going to privatize that, we're going to globalize the economy, and it's going to be great for you. And they have been quite convincing. Now, a big part of this is just politics. Once the reality of the economic trends that we've been talking about set in, many in the electorate begin to scratch their heads when they hear people say, I'm going to cut your taxes and privatize government. They start to think, and are starting to think, wait a minute, that sounded good at one point in time, but it's not looking so good right now, given that we've lost about 3 million jobs in manufacturing, given that while all this great boom has been going on during the 2000s and the stock market's been on a tear and all that, the median family income is actually worse than it was in 2000. Those contradictions are just I think, too strong for this yo-yo thing to keep going too much longer, and we're beginning to see a political pushback in that regard.